Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Well, today's video is a little bit of a special presentation, maybe even unexpected. You see, just over a year ago, my good friend and colleague Michael Awdry and I set about to design and create a model which was to be used to illustrate a lecture that we were going to give in our school to celebrate the 75th anniversary of VE Day, which of course was in June of this year. That model was also due to appear at an exhibition at the Excel Centre in London at Easter of this year, but sadly the pandemic situation sort of put an end to that. In fact, for months the model lay in pieces, separated by many miles, unable to put it together. Well, 2 weeks ago, and for the very first time, we managed to get all the pieces of the model together into such a place that we were able to take some photographs. Now, it was our intention to, having set it all up and hastily taken a few photos, to return to the model to capture some more and some video and retell the tale around which the model was based. However, the new lockdown has rather scuppered that plan, and so we can't tell the tale in the format that we wanted to. And of course, we've missed the 75th anniversary of VE Day anyway. But given that the day it is today, it seemed like an ideal opportunity to share with the world the model that was designed to celebrate a story from the Second World War, the essence of which was peace. You see, the model we built was of a castle, an Austrian castle, known as Schloss Itter. And Schloss Itter was the home or the host to the very final battle that took place in the European campaign. In fact, happened on the penultimate day of the European War. And really the tale is the stuff of Hollywood. It's full of action, suspense, intrigue, and it really was uncertain as to what the outcome would be. But the events of that day celebrate everything that's right about peace. And so, given that today is the 11th of November, seems like an ideal opportunity to share it with you. Now, because of the current lockdown, Michael and I have been unable to get together, so we've recorded a little conversational piece between us via Zoom. The quality, I've no idea yet quite how that's going to be. It might be variable to say the least. However, I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you enjoy seeing our photographs of the model and some of the tales that we'll share around how and why it was created. Thanks for watching. Well, I'm joined now by Michael Awdry. I must say, Michael and I, we used to work together, and Michael is, I was going to say, the site owner or curator of a wonderful blog, 28mm Victorian Warfare. That's the title of it. I'll put a link in the description. And Michael is interested in wargaming, but I think probably fair to say more so the painting and the creating of the models and the scenes and everything else. Is that fair to say, Michael?
Absolutely, yes. I think that's how I got into the hobby to begin with, was through the painting side, a sort of distraction from the real world and the day job. But no, absolutely, and the extension from that has obviously been into playing the games themselves.
Brilliant. So, with Michael's brief introduction sort of taken care of, Michael, this crazy project, over to you. You thought of it. What's it all about?
It's incredibly generous, but and thank you, James, for welcoming it along. We were tasked as a staff to come up with ideas for lectures, I seem to remember, and you had rather sort of got the ball rolling with Pegasus Bridge to commemorate the D-Day landings the year previously, and we sort of we watched that evolve from a sort of model building exercise that could illustrate the talk through a series of slides. And then when we finished that, to a great, huge success, wasn't it? We got it displayed at the front of the school, and the children all loved going around and seeing it. And we sort of looked at each other and sort of, well, what next? How could we take it further? The obvious extension to that was going to be something to commemorate the 75th anniversary of VE Day. And I remember scratching our heads and thinking of a few different options. We were looking at similar sort of size skirmishes and raids. And I think Google came to our aid in the end, and we ended up stumbling across the most spectacularly wonderful and strange battle that seemed to finish the European theatre with this previously unheard of battle at the Schloss Itter, an Austrian castle that was being used to keep the VIP French prisoners of war secure, now suddenly abandoned and left to their own fate as marauding SS were busily sort of stumbling over the countryside. And to their aid came the Americans from one side and a detachment of Germans from the other. And we thought, what a wonderful illustration to commemorate the end of the war. The idea that there were lessons to be learned, we felt, and things to explore for the pupils to take on board. And so we said, well, let's build a castle, I seem to remember. And then from that, we sort of went away and got scratching and drawing, and dreams started to become reality.
So I think for me, the thing that really made that story amazing was, I mean, at the time, I think we believed it was the only occasion when Americans and regular Germans fought side by side against the Nazis, common enemy. And I think we both thought that was in itself an interesting tale, a real good versus evil sort of story. But I've since learned, I think we may have discovered this together one day on YouTube, that there was another occasion, I think it was in Italy again towards the end of the war, where sort of Allies fought alongside Germans. But really, that's the main thing about this particular battle that we're going to talk about today, was this unlikely coalition. And the bravery of all of those involved getting involved in this strange coalition, which of course could have been a trap, could have led to all sorts of horrors. But I have the sense that everyone had their faith in doing what was right, and that was all played out through the battle, and ultimately, but although it wasn't guaranteed, was it, ultimately successfully? But it could have gone the other way.
I think it was nip and tuck, wasn't it? There were people that shouldn't have been there, and all sorts of operational moments that just would been left open to chance. Everyone seemed to be at the right place at the right time, and it was almost as if it had been scripted, like a movie. And I think that's possibly one of the reasons that caught our attention, because I think you and I had been brought up with sort of Sunday movies watching war movies on Sunday afternoons with parents, and just that whole sanitized version of the war. And later on, as we sort of discovered that the huge sort of loss of life and effect that it had on everyone, which is why I think we were keen to share the stories with the children and make sure that people weren't forgotten, that these actions weren't sort of consigned to the history books, and that there was a great amount of debt that we owed to all those that gave their lives and served, which is why another good reason for doing it or sharing this information, this part of the process today. Exactly. Yes, absolutely. What a wonderful, bizarre thing, and so that was it. That was our starting point, wasn't it?
It was, and so. I'm sort of reluctant to go through the whole story here, because this video would become far too long. I'm sure all the viewers will get really bored of it. But can you maybe summarize for us sort of like the salient points? So what happened on this particular action on that day? How did it play out? Because there are a few nuances to it, aren't there? There's a few bits that if you gloss over, it's sort of, you don't tell the whole story. But if you tell the whole story, it's the whole story is a complete book. So let's condense the book.
No, I think if we could imagine an Austrian castle suddenly with its prisoners left to wander the ramparts, wondering what on earth is going to happen. And clearly in fear for their lives. I mean, these were very well-known people. There were a couple of former prime ministers of France. There was an international tennis star. De Gaulle's sister was there. Trade union leaders. I mean, these people had a huge amount of worth to the German high command, and yet were seemingly abandoned as the Americans were charging forward. And what was happening, by all accounts, was that various sort of trophy hunting squads were firing off across the parts of Austria. And in fear of their lives, the commandant fled, left them to it. And suddenly the realization was that they needed some form of support. There were SS troops still operating in the area, targeting all sorts of people, those even Austrians that were looking to surrender at the time. And it really was a very confusing, very sort of fluid part of the campaign. And And so various people were sent off in sort of different, the cook and the handyman were sent off in two different directions. And as luck would have it, they stumbled across a defecting German soldier officer who said enough was enough, and he was looking to get his men safely home after the war. And he decided that this needed to was a good thing that he could get involved in. And meanwhile, a rather brash young American tank commander was also piqued. His curiosity was piqued, so he came rushing in from the other side, and they all sort of met up and said, "Well, let's get on and save the day." And so they duly did. They arrived at the castle just ahead of the SS troops and put together some very simple fortifications and posted troops in sort of defensive positions, along with the help of a convalescing SS officer that the French VIPs had befriended. Just in the nick of time, as the onslaught began, they had one tank parked up at the front. I think it was Besotted Jenny was on the gateposts, and they withheld through the day, through the night into the following day. And just as they were about to literally run out of ammunition, the cavalry literally arrived, and so they were they were saved. The SS were vanquished into the forests, and all were released with the loss of only one of the castle's defenders, that of Sepp Gangl himself, the German major. And so the story concludes. The Americans obviously went home, and our hero of the day, so Jack Lee, ended up trying to start a political campaign, but sadly came to naught. And so this sort of battle almost became lost until, I'd like to say we discovered it, but of course we didn't. But we did. We used it as a sort of a motif, as it were, for the VE Day.
But it's interesting because this battle did feature on the front page of the Daily Mirror on the day before VE Day, but I think maybe there was probably a lot of radio noise and what have you going around at the time, and the fact that this sort of rather heroic stand occurred, seemed to have, obviously it's not gone to history, it's there, and there's books about it, but it doesn't seem to be. I mean, it seemed to be, as we were doing it, everyone was like, well, I've never heard of that before. And it really is a fascinating story. It's worth maybe mentioning now that the cavalry was the second tank when Lee set off to kind of save the day and defend the castle, he was actually in a company of two tanks, and the second tank, which was named Boschbuster, hung back in the village a few miles away to kind of defend their route out. And I'd rather get the idea that maybe they thought that Lee could raid the castle, save the day, and get out again. But of course, that wasn't the case, was it? It became just a defensive stand. It was kind of, how can we protect these visitors from the marauding SS? But the second tank, Boschbuster, which led the cavalry relief right at the 11th hour, it was very interesting. There was a connection there as well that we managed to make. I don't know if you maybe like to sort of share.
Well, I was going to say, I was rather hoping that you were going to mention that, but only because it came through one of your Instagram posts, didn't it? You were using, I can't remember which hashtag you were using. I would imagine.
I can't remember. I've sort of gone a bit quiet on Instagram, but yeah, I posted a picture on Instagram of the model, and this would have been probably just before Christmas, maybe about this time of last year. Just posted a picture of the model of the castle in a kind of raw MDF state, looking a bit rough and ready. And yeah, we had a gentleman contact us, John Sherman, who was the grandson of Glenn E. Sherman, who, I'm not sure if he was the driver or the commander, but certainly he was, he led, or he was involved with the relief. They at the right time, they left the bridge that they'd been left to defend, and charged up, and literally at the 11th hour, guns blazing and what have you, managed to, I think at this point, would it be fair to say the SS attack kind of, guess they must have seen the tank coming, all guns blazing, and they sort of faded into the woods, I believe.
So, I mean, there are, as we investigated, there was sort of several conflicting stories, weren't there, with who was where and when. At one point, the SS were firing in very large munitions into the side of the castle, and it would seem to all inevitability that it would crumble literally to the ground.
Well, because they had anti-tank weapons, didn't they? They were using it against the castle.
Yeah, there's wonderful shots and pictures of the whole thing, literally with great big holes in it. And so we can only assume that the sight of Sherman tanks appearing up the sort of route to the castle was enough to make them think that, hang on, we need to get out of here, because they would have been aware again of just the huge flux and flow of troops all over the place. Nobody actually quite knew who was where and when at this point, and you've got divisions from various different regiments all over the place, Germans and Americans, all sort of probing forward and then having to retreat. Americans obviously were very strict guidelines as to which areas they could and couldn't move forward in. And the story goes that one of the relief columns was actually told to turn back, or had to turn back, because it found itself verging into another division's territory. And there was obviously the fear that, friendly fire, and they would become targets to their own. So the whole area is hugely confusing. So we can only assume that they just thought there was more Americans out there than Lee's second tank charging up with a couple of jeeps behind it. I mean, more did eventually arrive, but it was this whole sort of chaotic, last stand, frenetic pace to the battle that saw it seesawing both ways. And I think if they hadn't left when they did, that the castle would most definitely have fallen.
Yes. Oh, I think without doubt. I think one of the things that I found interesting, and it's difficult to know if this is true or not, because there are lots of, there's some conflicting accounts on what happened. But I like to think that from what I sort of managed to piece together, that when Boschbuster and Glenn E. Sherman arrived to sort of save the day, that they did have a proper fight. They met the full resistance, it seems, of those marauding SS that were surrounding the castle. I think it's Stephen Harding's book. I'm going from memory here, so it's been like a year since I've read this, so I might be wrong, but I think the account there sort of speaks of the resistance sort of dissolving, if you like. But there are certainly other eyewitness accounts at the time that say that when Boschbuster arrived, it was a full-on battle for them up from the village to the castle, and that could well have been the very last sort of, I don't know, tank offensive of the European campaign. And so, I mean, I remember us being overjoyed when we discovered that the grandson of someone who was there had sort of taken an interest and given us a like on Instagram. That was quite nice. It was also nice, of course, because once that connection had been made, I spent hours, far more time.
Absolutely.
Trawling through the American 12th Armored Division accounts. And I think we even mentioned turn up a photograph of Glenn E. Sherman, which his grandson hadn't seen. So that felt nice. And John Sherman, of course, sent us some stuff about his grandfather, which is interesting to read and just sort of get the background on that particular gentleman.
And you're absolutely right. I remember it being a spine-tingling moment when we had that connection, because up until then it had been a battle that, as you said, we'd never heard about, but also that one, it was an American battle, and there we go, a couple of British chaps bumbling around creating this sort of project. But suddenly it became very, very real to us again, which is exactly what we wanted to do. We wanted to share this sort of period of history that we enjoy so much with pupils that just wouldn't necessarily have connected. And so we were able to say that tank there and point to it was delivered by this chap on this Instagram post over here, look, and they could actually start to see, sorry, it's his grandfather, I should say. Yeah. So it really was a magical moment, wasn't it? It sort of all made it
really
real.
good, sort of made us, I think it really sort of motivated us to do a little bit more, didn't it? And sort of dig in and get the thing finished. Definitely. So moving then on to the model, and it's a shame that we're recording this in this format and we're not stood next to the thing. I mean, it's quite big. It gives a sense for how big this thing is. It's massive, isn't it?
we and I can't remember. We used the scale came about because of the sort of figures that I liked. So the 28mm 156 scale, and so you were tasked to come up with some some drawings, and there was a sort of a gulp as you realised how big the initial castle was. And I can remember us drawing out with masking tape on one of the tables up in the photography area up there, just the sort of footprint of the castle alone, which didn't at that time sort of seem too bad.
It's
It was
quite manageable.
fine. Yeah, and until one of the panels was starting to be cut, and we sort of looked at each other and thought, oh, dear me. And we worked out that, you know, in order to create enough base work for it, that this was going to be quite a sizable project. And there had to have been a moment where we suddenly had, well, I've got a sneaky feeling it might have been your fault again. I'm certainly going to land it at you. Where we said, well, look, what can we do? We're not just going to build a castle. We need to give ourselves a bit more of a goal here. You know, what would be the end goal for you? And I seem to remember saying, well, you know, ideally we would want to put Toy Soldier. We'd want to try and reenact it as a war game. And where would you do that? You said, and I said, well, yeah, surely the UK's largest independent wargaming event down in the Excel Centre, you know, salute. And how does one go about that was the next question. Before I know it, we've got ourselves a table, and we were
we had to carry on then, didn't we? We couldn't give up.
Yeah, we were registered under the school's model club, as it were, to produce this spectacular war game. And then suddenly the realization that we would have to build a playing area, not just the castle. And at which point, I think the sort of dimensions became, well, we started to be aware that we were looking at somewhere in the region of 10 foot by 6 foot, weren't we?
Yeah, which now doesn't seem so big. But I remember when putting that Pegasus Bridge together, and you know, eyes were sort of popping out. Crikey, it's a bit big. It's a bit over the top. And then, of course, so I guess we probably started in earnest around September of last year. Would that seem reasonable? With the deadline of Easter to have the thing complete. I mean, that in itself is.
Yeah, I think I'd spent most of the summer holiday working out how a game could be created. I have absolutely no ideas in writing rules for war games, but I sort of cobbled together enough bits and pieces from games that I played, and sort of showed them to somebody that who does know what he's talking about, sort of Stephen Gilbert, and he very kindly sort of came back and said, "No, I think you've got something here. This should all work." And remember, we were only going to create a participation game. We wanted people basically to be clambering all over it and just to get involved. And so the whole premise was going to be to create a game that could educate people as they moved around. So it was always going to be steering them roughly to follow the sort of timeline of the battle, which again would inform the lecture that we were hoping to give as well. And so I spent that summer just scribbling down ideas and communicating and coming up with designs and patterns, and I think a little bit of toy soldier painting, whilst you were furiously putting together ideas for the actual physical drawings for the castle itself. So when we got back in September and could get our hands on the laser cutter again, that's when we started to see it come to life, wasn't it?
Yes, and of course, I think it was, I don't know, probably about, I think by this point, so I need to sort of add in here, Michael and I used to work together, and it was at about this point I announced that I was moving on to a different job. Therefore, the sort of the element of the work that was to fall to me, all of a sudden we didn't really have an Easter deadline. That had to be brought right forward, so that Michael could get on with the scenic side and everything else. So really it was a bit of a mad dash, wasn't it, for that sort of term at school. Literally every spare second was spent creating bits of an Austrian mountainside, but quite good fun, very creative time.
It was a whole period of change for both of us in many ways, because I'd taken on additional responsibilities. I was doing boarding duties, so was able to get across to the art studios in the evening when I was free. And so we would sit there and sort of frantically sort of try to put this thing together, and still not quite sure how the boards and things were going to work, because things were having to be done out of sync slightly. But then we were forever getting distracted by the smallest thing.
Yes.
The gatehouse being one of...
Yeah,
Sorry.
well, I've got a gatehouse here. This was the prototype. I've got it here. Yeah, little bits and pieces that I guess made it fun for us.
They started to become, it all depended, I think, on the quality of the images that we had. And we had some lovely pictures. Somebody had taken some pictures on a holiday up there of the gatehouse, and you were able to really, I think, that fashion this wonderful construction to the point where you'd actually pretty much built it. We didn't need to do another one, but I was desperate to have a go at building it myself. And so all of this would double the amount of time that we needed. But it was just a joy. And it was at this point that I realized that, you know, the design was going to work, that there was enough, you had got enough sort of idea about how to convert architectural details into manageable wargaming terrain. And whilst we were both very much learning on the jobs, things were now starting to appear. There were a few scuffles and battles along the way where sort of the idea of detail and accuracy were being sort of having to be balanced with practicality. And I know in your case, it had to be perfect. Several things were done 3 or 4 times until time literally ran out, I seem to remember. But for me, I was always just a huge amount of excitement. I would come in the next day to find yet more bits cut and ready to go, or something had moved on. But soon enough, you know, that was it. You had finished as much as you could do at the one school before moving on to your new post, as it were. And we were left at that point. I think we had just shown the empty boards. We'd offered the empty boards up just as you literally walked out the door. And that, I think, was the first and last time for a while that we actually saw the extent of what we had in front of us.
Well, but that was a point where, for me, the project became really exciting because they were literally blank, 3-dimensional blank canvases. And then, of course, I was sort of popping in and seeing him maybe once a week, once a fortnight, and catching up. And it was at that point you did all the scenic work and made the thing look beautiful. You sort of had it was literally a blank canvas, wasn't it? All the painting, the trees, and we could say how many trees you made. And so each week or fortnight I'd visit, and I'm aware I just held you up. You didn't get any work done. I would just be gawping and taking pictures of your wonderful progress. And for me, that was really exciting, coming back, you know, week after week and seeing how far you'd taken it. It was amazing. What were there any techniques or things that you used then that you think, do you know what, that was great, I'm pleased I did it that way, or that didn't really work?
I think there's nothing ever original, is there? We always develop ideas from things that we see, and there's a lot of tutorials, and I'm sure we'll put some links in the sort of area of the video when we talk about them. But we stumbled across a couple of tree making tutorials that we liked, and I think they were for model railways initially. That involved things like coconut hanging basket liners and lots and lots of sort of oh gosh, I can't remember what it's called now off the top of my head, but basically sort of creating the trees over sort of time and spraying them and then dipping them in the various sort of different materials that we were using. But there were all sort of fun things along the way the problems that we had to solve. And the trees themselves offered up a quite unique one, which was that how on earth we couldn't transport such large gaming boards with trees in situ. We knew also that we couldn't just have them because the terrain was so uneven. They couldn't just be balanced and perched there. So that's where the biro idea came from.
I'm going to keep.
We went on the hunt. Yeah, I can remember offering up emails to the staff saying, "Have you got any old biros kicking around on your desk?" And we would basically plant them into the foam, didn't we? And then we could just drop these trees in on cocktail sticks, so they could be just simply picked up and repositioned. And again, allowing us to get in there with the photography. I think that was all part of the concept. So that worked really well. Things that we just didn't consider initially, would be successful, turned out to be really good. The expanding foam filler, just because of the huge expanse of space, because we initially thought about using sort of blue foam, hadn't we? but the foam filler did the job, and then we would seal it with just builder's cork.
And it was really quick, wasn't it? I mean, I've shown it being used in a video with my Bexhill West project, and there's a few comments. People are like, "Ooh, you know, is that a great idea?" But I think it really was, wasn't it? And
Yeah.
I think if you put it on with the proper gun and you've got the proper cleaner to hand, I mean, it was clean and tidy, wasn't it?
It just got things moving, because again we were right up against it at this point, and wanting to get as much finished and done. Any sort of heavy duty or involved woodworking was terrifying me. At the moment you walked out the door, I was thinking, oh gosh, you know, we're not going to be able to cope. So I was desperate to get all of that done. And so yes, blocking it in with the expanding foam filler was great. I mean, we'd used all sorts of recycled bits underneath, and just as ballast, almost, just to create this whole space, and then cut into that just with bread knives, and then we're able to situate the different models. So most things could lift up and be put back down again.
And
then it was just painting.
Yeah, sorry, I was just interrupting you. The builder's cork as a topping on that. I mean, that was genius. I don't know where you got that from, but that works.
I think, again, desperation. I think I'd run out of polyfiller or something like that, and we were just reaching around for whatever we had, and it took ages to set, didn't it? It was an absolute pig, but it was very forgiving. It was particularly working in the school environment. We got lots of little fingers wanting to prod it and touch
it. Nice rubbery surface.
Yeah, it just gave, didn't it? And we could cut into it, things could be put into it, it could be painted, it took the paint reasonably well. And then, of course, by the time it was flocked on top, you just didn't know. And so that became a wonderful little quick fix. And also, you know, the idea of transporting it. We knew that it was going to be a little bit more forgiving, as it was all bumped all the way down to London. So that was really good. That sort of terrain building ideas, but things just started to get silly, didn't they? And again, it was partly my fault. There was any sort of distraction that I could think of. I can remember saying, wouldn't it be lovely if we had a crashed plane here somewhere? And the next thing we know, you're designing, you know, crash storched, or we read somewhere about somebody taking fire from a small electricity generator, or substation down on the paddock, the lower paddock below the castle. And then, you know, next thing I know, you've come up with this sort of little design for me, and I could sort of put it in there. So we started creating just simple bases that we could drop things on top of, and then just move around depending on where we wanted to put them. Some more silly than others. I mean, there was a log cabin, there was all sorts of things going on at one point.
I hope I can find a photograph of the log cabin. And I'll just add here that, so there was, I'm not even sure it's part of the story, is it? I think you just wanted a log cabin, like a woodcutter's hut. So I thought, oh, well, okay, why not? So I came up with a little log cabin based on a photo of something I'd seen on the internet, and to make it look like a woodcutter's place, it had the most rudimentary of little circular saw that I'd kind of caricatured, with a ferocious looking blade on it, just so that it was obvious what it was. And then I remember returning a week or so later to find a severed hand attached to the saw blade with quite a lot of gore. Brilliant stuff. It just made the model, obviously it's a bit silly. It was sort of, you know, you could argue it was detracting from the story, but we remember this was to engage kids, wasn't it? And it's just a bit of fun.
Absolutely, yeah, I think so. And I think once we had decided that it was going to be used not only to illustrate the lecture for V-Day, but also to be part of a much larger game, and one that was literally, you know, involved you getting into and participating with. Little sort of Easter eggs, I think sometimes they refer to, were hidden all over the castle. There was all sorts of things going to emerge, and yes, the log cabin didn't need to be there, but you know, neither did the pheasants or the rabbits or the dinosaur skeleton that was being partially exposed, the fossil remains of a dinosaur, and all of these little things that we started to put in there, just to allow people that joy and wonderment as they walked around, just to see maybe to take of our sense of humour, but also to make it that little bit more interactive, and people just enjoyed walking and being with it. We got a lot of people as we started to build it. We were documenting it on certainly on my blog, but also your Instagram account and your blog as well. And to the point where people were starting to really give us a lot of positive feedback, and I can't thank all those people enough. Actually, that really gave us the incentive to keep moving forward, didn't it? And I can remember shortly after you produced the beds for the locker room, Dave Stone got in touch with, we said, well, those beds need mattresses, and we sent him some dimensions, and next thing we know, he'd sent us these wonderful little resin mattresses of people that he's, and wouldn't take any money for them. They were just his contribution. He wanted to be part of the castle.
I felt
similarly, one of the chaps that I follow in Germany has submitted a little bit of a 3D print of a car, didn't he?
Yeah, wonderful. And this was the real thing. There was lots of people got involved, didn't they, via the internet? And it really, followers of your most excellent blog, I think they appreciated it. It was a bit of a loony project, but I think that your sense of humour as well, or no, I'm going to say our sense of humour, because I think we both, whilst it was a serious event or whatever, in order to get the engagement going, there was lots, as you've just described, lots of funny little bits that are just there just to entertain. If you had no interest in the story or that piece of history, there's plenty there to capture people, and I think a lot of the followers of certainly of your blog bought into that in a way that it really did make the project come alive. And it was so delightful reading their feedback and the encouragement.
I absolutely, and just those were the sort of the moments that you should say kept us going. And then, of course, it all started to become a sort of large cloud started to appear on the horizon, which was coronavirus. We were watching it creep across Europe, and then we started to worry about what was going to happen. We could see what was happening certainly in places like Italy and Spain, and the country's been locked down and events been cancelled. And whilst the great British spirit is such that we would deny all knowledge that this was coming our way up until it finally hit the shores, I think you and I both started to realise that this was probably going to impact on us at some point. And sure enough, it did. I can't remember if Salute was cancelled before the schools got closed or the other way around. In fact, I seem to remember rushing to finish the last base board before our school was closed. We went into remote teaching. And then I think shortly after that, we heard the inevitable news, which was that, well, actually, no, it must have been before that, because, of course, Salute was at the Excel, which became the Nightingale Hospital, didn't it? So,
Salute must have been cancelled previously. Either way, the effect was the same, wasn't it? All of these months of planning and hard work, real hard work, came to naught, really. It was a little bit, I don't want to say depressing, because as news flow goes, it was really not that bad, given that lots of people were unwell, but frustrating, maybe.
Certainly frustrating. And then, at that point there, we suddenly realised that what were we going to do? And of course, I seem to remember, we did. We had the castle split over at least two counties at one point. And bits of it were all over the place, mostly in your front room, various classrooms. But then, I finished off all the painting during lockdown. As you say, we were very fortunate from that point of view. We were both healthy and happy and carried on getting into sort of mischief and distraction and all the rest of it. But it wasn't quite what we wanted, and so we were hoping desperately to bring it all together, and had started moving plans to do that very thing. And just seeing it a couple of weeks ago, finally in the front hall there of the school, was wonderful. And yes, it's not quite there, is it? If we're honest with ourselves, I think it's not. But
I think had the situation with the pandemic not have happened, then the last 2 weeks running up to Easter would have been quite frantic, and I think we would have taken it further than we have. I think once the realization that the the end goal is gone. And of course, we didn't then later in June have the opportunity to get it out to celebrate the anniversary of VE Day, which really was the main, the main reason for doing it. That we were denied that as well. And I speak for myself here, when you put a lot of energy into a project and I don't know, and the goalposts move, you can become a bit dejected, a bit downhearted. And I mean, there was a while, particularly when I was staring at it in the front room. Half of it was in my front room with no trees. And it was, not I don't know what to say, certainly not depressing, but disappointing. And hence, really, this is why we're now having this remote conversation in some way to try and communicate what this project was all about. Because certainly for another month during this second lockdown, we're not going to be able to put the thing together again and film it and share it. And then, of course, when do you share it? There is the perfect opportunity has passed.
No, the worry was very much that shortly after, and obviously we are still teaching, but the expectation will be that I quietly dismantle the castle in the coming weeks, and it will probably be stored somewhere. And you're absolutely right. The incentive to get it out again is probably lacking a little bit. It's almost as if it's had its moment, or we've missed its moment possibly. But yet, because of everything and the people, the friends and the commentators and everyone along the way, we felt we did owe it to ourselves and to everyone else to at least get it out there, to share it, and not least also because of what we set out to do, which was to commemorate the end of the war in Europe. It was part of a larger, more spectacular thing that we'd hoped to celebrate with nationwide across the world. And I still hope to be able to do that. I mean, I still hope that we can put the lecture together at some point. And we never know. Salute 21 may come around. We can pray and see what happens. It would be lovely if the castle could. But I think we both rather suspect that it may not. And so rather than sort of pin everything on that, I think we wanted to celebrate now and then not worry so much if we didn't have the opportunity to share it later.
Yeah, exactly that. So I don't really know what more to say without sort of rambling on, and that's probably not appropriate now. So what I'll do is I'll make sure that there are links in the video description below here to Michael's excellent blog, and I would, if you skip through this video and do nothing other than go and check out his blog and have a look at some of the wonderful models that Michael has produced and especially painted. His skill in that respect is really first class. He would deny, he's very bashful about his abilities, but I think you would enjoy having a look at what he's done. I would love to have a conversation like this again, where we just spoke about how you paint your figures and the processes that you use. I have got up here, actually, they're behind me. They're still on their washer bases. Regular viewers of the channel may recall that some while ago, Michael, if I get this from the camera, painted some wonderful characters up for Bexhill West. And I'm sure people would love to know a little bit more about the techniques and processes you use to produce those. Oh, brilliant. So maybe this is a conversation that we could extend. Have you got anything with you? Any of the props or the bits and pieces?
Well, I guess I've got one little. I've got Bosch Buster itself. I'm not sure if this is going to work. There we go. Bosch Buster. Which
so
we
Bosch
sort of
Buster was the main tank that was parked in the gatehouse. In defense.
No. Bosch
oh, sorry, no, of course it wasn't. Of course it wasn't. Yes. It's because we're recording this, and I'm still in front of the camera. No, of course it wasn't. No, Bosch Buster was the saviour.
We've got. I don't know whether that's going to come up. So.
No, that's fantastic. Can you just tell us a little bit about this guy?
So this is a wonderful miniature that I sort of sourced online of the. I think initially he was a cricket player with a hand grenade in one hand, but Jean Barotra was the tennis player. I mean, he was actually working, I think, well, I'm going to need to check all my notes, as you say, it's been far too long, but he was certainly politically involved. I want to say with the trade union, or the Basque movement, wasn't it? And had been arrested for his sympathies in that area, but was actually, prior to that, an international tennis star. He was part of the Four Musketeers, the French quadruples that went on to win Grand Slams all around the world, and including Wimbledon. And this gentleman was a bit like this sort of Hiltz character in The Great Escape. You know, he had tried to escape from the castle 3 times and kept being caught and returned. And he would carry on running around the courtyard and trying to maintain his fitness levels. But in the dying moments of the battle, he said, "Look, we need to get some help. We need to let them know where we are, and bring them in." And he tried. So they dressed up as a German or Austrian peasant and clambered over the walls one final time. Managed to run straight into a German machine gun post manned by the SS troops, and did what any self-respecting Frenchman would do, which was to take himself off to the nearest tree and relieve himself, and smile sweetly at the machine gun team, and walked off through the forest. They didn't apparently bat an eyelid or challenge him, and then managed to find the Americans that were heading their way and be able to guide them through the forest and up the track. So he insisted at that point, I think, that he was given a uniform to wear as well, and so he could ride atop of the tank and as a true French hero, and be there to see the day. So,
and a real hero. I mean, who would volunteer to escape through through SS against machine guns, rifles, anti-tank guns? I mean, the confidence the guy must have had that he could pull off his role as an Austrian peasant, and it's just extraordinary. It's up there with everything, you know. I don't understand why there isn't or hasn't been a film made yet of this particular battle, because the whole story is littered with little gems like that, isn't there, of real courage or whatever it might be, crazy little plot elements that seem unbelievable in their own right, but contribute to the.
And I think we did. We sat there, didn't we, and wondered what on earth we could do. And I think that sort of almost whimsical quality was the bit that sort of sparked some of the more amusing distractions. The silly things like the plot points that I was going to design for the game started to become more and more silly. I've got a couple here, but not hugely funny ones, unfortunately. But little elements like I don't know whether that's going to come up here. Sort of. Yeah, there's sort of filing cabinets, and there's sort of broom which sort of nods to things like sort of a mild-mannered janitor may have left it there before disappearing into the filing cabinet. There were all sorts of silliness going on. But yes, it's a huge amount of fun. And as I said, it's been, I think, an opportunity when you suggested that we have the opportunity just to talk about it, just to get it out there to share, was something we had to do. It's not something I'm particularly comfortable doing, but it was just wonderful to be able to celebrate it one last time, I think. At least give it an airing.
Well, I will illustrate this recording by hopefully editing at suitable points some of the photographs we've got of the model. But it's worth pointing out that although we took some photos a couple of weeks ago, I don't think, well, it certainly wasn't our final photo shoot, was it? It was, we'd put it together and we grabbed a few pictures whilst we could. So I don't think we've actually got any, I'm going to say, decent photos that reflect what our ambitions were for it as a project. So, but I'll put up what we've got, because that is all we've got. And I do hope that we can revisit this, and maybe in the new year things will have calmed down and we can sort of set up a better studio space and tell the story through photos, maybe a little bit of video, in the way in which we originally planned. That would certainly be a wonderful thing to do.
Absolutely. Something to look forward to.
Super. So Have you got anything to add, or shall we pop a pin in it here?
I think this feels like a good point to maybe draw a line under proceedings.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time. I hope Michael's enthusiasm for this project sort of communicates to all those of you out there on YouTube watching it. It's been a joy to work with Michael, and once again, it's a pleasure having this chat now with you. So I look forward to seeing you after lockdown, and we'll think of what the next project might be.
Absolutely. Look forward to it. And thank you so much, James. All the very, very best.
Take care, Mike. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.
And so there you have it. I hope you enjoyed that conversation between Michael and I. Michael really is a very, very talented modeller, and it's been a real joy and a pleasure to work with him. I hope that for those of you for whom the story of Schloss Itter and the events of that day, I hope for those of you for whom that's all new, I hope you found it interesting. And I really would recommend you to study it a little bit more if you get the chance, because it's fascinating. It teaches us an awful lot about the human condition, but more importantly, the value of peace. And today, of all days, is about remembering those who've given so much that we might enjoy peace. So whether you're watching this today on the 11th of November or at some point in the future, the message is always the same. We will remember them. Thank you.